firstly, welcome everybody here today. We're going to talk about real conversations, how to actually have them in a team, and I'll share a little bit more about our own experience with that as we get into that. First, I just wanted to make a few announcements that are going on. I thought those of you who are sort of closer to us in the inner circle, as it were, learning and practicing ID, maybe more than others, you might appreciate just sort of having inner circle knowledge. The most important thing that's going on right now is today is Ian Robertson's birthday. So we'll start by wishing Ian a really happy birthday. He's a wonderful member of our team. I know he'll play down his birthday, but deep inside, I know he loves it. So
Yeah, I do. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you got me. Yeah.
No, they don't.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome. All right, a couple of other things. We have our next ID certification program coming up in April. It's April 19, 20, and then May 3. So some people say, well, how many days is it? So it's 3 days. It's an online but live program. It's not pre-recorded. It's a live program. And this one is on a US West Coast and Australia friendly time zone. So we try and vary them each time to cover different parts of the world, but it's primarily for people that want to dig in deeper to understanding ID, either for their own personal development or because in some way they see themselves practicing ID in a coaching or consulting capacity. Whether it's your career move or whether it's just you using it in a team, it's an opportunity to not only dig deeper, to learn more. Probably one of the greatest benefits is that you get to talk to other people who have a similar interest and they share their stories and their nuances around their ID, and it just really heightens people's knowledge and insight. And I'd really encourage you, even if you've already done that program, the number of people who have done it second and third time and say, every time we do it, because it's a different group, we learn something new and like a lot new, and there's things we hear for the first time. So if this is appealing to you, please give it some thought and get in touch with Ian. He'll give you all the details. Linked to that, we're at our conference in Sydney last week, and to those of you who were there, I just want to thank you again for coming. It was a really fabulous day. We never know what's going to go down at those days because it's such an honest, authentic, vulnerable day. People feel very safe to just speak their truth and share their stories. It was a fabulous day. We all learned a lot, shared a lot, and just got, I guess, more connected to each other. No one takes it for granted these days that COVID has, sort of interrupted things there. Makes us appreciate the times when we really can come together. But one of the things we did do was we released our upgraded belt grading model. And so one of the things we developed years ago was, like in martial arts, how you have a belt grading system to advance, have a way of acknowledging the development of and application of your capabilities. So we have a similar thing for people to learn and be acknowledged for their improved skills with ID. And one of the things we did this year, so it goes from white belt through to black belt, and this year we opened up a framework for beyond black belt, as you have in martial arts. There's different levels that you can go to as a black belt. So if that interests you to have a structure around your development around ID skills and capabilities, get in touch with Ian and he can share with you that belt grading framework. It's not for everyone. We get that. It's not everyone wants to get into that, but there are people that say, I'd love to learn more and get to be as good as the consultant that I was, that I've come to know well. I'd love to have her or his skills. And is there a structured framework? Well, there is. And if you get in touch with Ian, he can share that with you. The next thing is, for those of you in the US, we are planning on having a similar conference day on November the 2nd in California. So I know not all of you are in California, but if you have reason to be there or want to make the trip, please I want to give you as much notice as possible that on that day, November the 2nd, we have a full day slated to be in person and run a similar live day. We'll have more information on that coming out over the next few weeks, but just know that that is the date and it will be in California. And then the final thing I wanted to announce was we showcased last week, and I'm just sharing this so everyone feels in the know, we have a new or an upgraded ID platform that we're going to be releasing in Q3 of this year. So somewhere from the 1st of July through August and September, we've showed the people there last Thursday the demonstration of it all. We're just doing some of the beta testing now and finessing the cobwebs, and we'll have that ready to be released. We're hoping it will be much closer to July 1 than September 30, but it will be in Q3. So, and that is a fabulous upgrade. Everyone who's seen it is delighted with the capabilities and functionality that it has. So keep your eye out for that. If we'll probably do more demonstrations of the platform as we lead up to July. So if you see invitations coming out for that, we want to help you be as aware of it and how to use it as soon as possible. So just know that that's coming up and keep your eye out for that as well. All right. Any questions before we jump into today's program? Okay. So with that, let me go ahead and share. Hopefully you can see this slide okay. So this is the topic of today. How to have real, authentic conversations in teams. And the reason this came up as a topic is because we have talked for a long time with ID about how people can use ID as a way of understanding each other and building trust in order to have those real conversations. And it does. It certainly does help, and it's helped many people and many teams. But we were coming across situations where people, for all of the knowledge they had about ID, for all of the trust and the respect that they felt they had, they still weren't having those conversations. And to be totally vulnerable and honest with you guys, the same was true within our team with ID. And we actually got to experience a lot of what we're going to share with you today. We got to experience that firsthand in our conference, which was on for all of last week. And got to practice some of the things we're going to share with you today that I think were the missing ingredients to how to have these conversations. So we're looking forward to sharing this with you. So what we're going to cover today is, first of all, what do we mean by real conversations, just so that we level set and everyone's on the same page, and why are they critical to success in high performance teams? What are the protocols that you need for building the trust, respect, and what people now refer to as the psychological safety that's required in order to have those real conversations? What else is required to have them other than the trust, respect, and psychological safety? And how does our ID impact all of that? For all that we can have the rules of the game, sometimes just the way we show up because of how we're wired can just get in the way if we're not aware of what it is that we bring to the table, both the strengths but also the vulnerabilities. So we're going to dig into that. When we talk about real conversations, what we're talking about is having the conversations that feel risky, the ones where you feel like you might be likely to offend someone, or they're likely to take it badly. You don't know how they're going to react. So there's a level of trepidation and anxiety about approaching a real conversation. If you've got to go and give someone a pay raise or promote them, or tell them they won the lottery, no one seems to worry about having that type of real conversation. It's still a very real conversation. But I just put up here some examples that occur within teams where, for example, the very last point about making decisions, right? A lot of times teams make a decision, but they do it without a real conversation. And I've often said to teams, you don't know whether you've made a decision until you've discussed the trade-offs. Because it's only when you say, okay, what this decision means is, if we're going to do priority 1, we're going to stop doing priorities 7 and 8. And the people responsible for 7 and 8 sort of then pipe up and go, oh, I didn't realize that that's what this meant. Hang on a second. And now the ball's kicked into play for a real conversation. Whether that conversation goes well or whether it derails the very decision you thought you made depends on the ability of the team to have those real conversations in a healthy and constructive way. So that's what we're talking about when we refer to real conversations. And there are people that think that they're having real conversations when they haven't really gotten under the covers and had the real discussion, like I just said about trade-offs. To me, trade-offs are the litmus test of a real decision. I've often used the example, like we're coming up to the Easter weekend. Someone says, what are you doing for Easter? Oh, we're going to go to my parents' place, which would be interesting in my case. But if we went to my parents' place, that means we're not going to go to your partner's place. someone says, whoa, hang on a sec. Who's telling them? You know, well, aren't you going to talk? I'm not telling them, you know, and so the real conversation begins. All right. One of the things I want to share with you is, why does this matter in teams? Why is it important to have real conversations? What we found is that one of the hallmarks of a high performance team is the way they collaborate together. And they've got to be able to collaborate not just on the good topics and the fun topics, they've got to be able to deal with the stuff, you know, the tough conversations that occur. And basically, you can't have real conversations. If you look at this diagram here, I'm sharing it with you because it really lands for people. They really get this. Like, this resonates with their experience on a team. I'm showing it to you backwards. I'm showing it to you from the hallmark of the ingredients of a high performance team. If you want to have the real conversations, in order to have the collaboration and the innovation and the success that happens, including driving transformations, which many companies are doing today, they basically get derailed because people couldn't approach in a healthy and constructive way a real conversation. In order to have that, you've got to have a foundation of trust and an environment of psychological safety for people to have those conversations. And what we found is that when teams form, if I look at this from the left to the right, when teams form, the natural default in a team is not the ability to trust each other and to have that psychological safety. The natural default, and you know, we could have another webinar on why this happens, but the natural behavior is one of suspicion. And unless you do something very intentionally and consciously to arrest it, natural suspicion just sort of flows into passive-aggressive behavior. And passive-aggressive behavior is the exact opposite of real conversations. And when teams are burdened with a passive behavior culture and not having the conversations, everyone just reverts to doing their own thing. And so it's very easy to then get misaligned, have people continue to work in their silos. Instead of doing things that are centralized and agreed, they just do their own thing. And they either fail or they fail to optimize. But everyone knows we're not really thriving as a team. Now, I've had some teams say, well, but we don't, it's not an issue here. We know each other really well. We've worked together for years. We have a good level of trust. But if you measure trust by way of the ability to have real conversations, many teams don't have trust. What they have is camaraderie. And camaraderie means that you get on with each other, the people that you maybe know and like, but it doesn't mean you can necessarily confront the real conversations. So this part here is really, you know, having this model in your mind and thinking about where your team might be at is really huge. What we say is there's an inflection point that teams need to acknowledge and do the work to build the foundation of trust, to build the psychological safety on which the real conversations can then occur. One way you know whether you have trust is to see whether these types of things exist in your team. Do people assume positive intent? Is there a healthy level of curiosity rather than criticism in the way people react to each other? Is the same conversation outside the room the one that happens inside the room? That's, you know, that is a very tangible way of being able to test where you're at for real conversations. When there's really good trust, and this is almost like the holy grail of trust in teams, is people being willing to cross-represent each other. You know, someone finding out that someone's traveling to the location next week that they were intending going to, and instead of going saying, hey, if you're going to be there, would you mind stepping in for me and representing me? You're only going to do that with someone that you trust. And equally volunteerism, right? If you've got a really healthy level of trust and safety, people feel safe to volunteer their thoughts, volunteer their ideas, volunteer their time, volunteer their resources. If they've got people on their team that they will volunteer up. If people are feeling threatened, unsafe, anxious, they tend to shut down on not only their own efforts, but on this concept of volunteerism. They're very tangible ways or signals to look for as ways of knowing where are you at on this scale here of having a foundation of trust. All right, where does the ID play into all of this? All of you here having done the ID and asking about that, there's really a couple of important points. I put the words in here because I'm going to send you the deck after this call, and in case you want to share it with people that aren't on the call, I put some context in here so that you remember the essence of it. But this first point is really, I remember when I only got this about 3 years ago through some research work being done by a lady called Laurie Kendall at the Ohio State University. And she said to me, Paul, the thing is, there's a physiological change that occurs when someone feels like another person gets them. That moment changes everything. Up until then, when we don't know how people are likely to react, we tend to be in a place of fight or flight. We're conscious about what we say, when we say it, how we say it, because we're trying to sort of, well, we don't know how the other person's likely to take it. But once you feel someone gets you, there's a relief about that. People free up and they shift from fight or flight to that place of safety where they feel that, you know, more able, willing to open up and share their truth. We talk about, you know, you hear these days in teams, people saying, I feel invisible. I feel like I can't have a voice. I can't speak my truth. I don't know who to trust. Like, who speaks the truth here? Well, whatever those questions are being asked, it's a very good indication there isn't the foundation that you need for real conversations. And the ID is a great, you know, like catalyst for helping people get each other. It's not just that they understand their differences, because you're understanding the way someone's wired at their innermost, truest self. That's why people say, oh, I've done other profiling tools and, you know, the ID feels different. Yeah, because it's getting to the heart of who you are. And when you understand that about yourself, it means something to you. But when you feel that someone else knows that about you or gets that, it's the getting piece. And you think about your own experience with ID, when you've had conversations where someone finally goes, oh, I now understand where you're coming from. Think about what happens to you. Your reaction to that is one that shifts you physiologically from the fight or flight to the one of safety. And that's the game changer. The second thing that's really important is about showing up in stride, because when you're in stride, you feel more confident, you feel more courageous and willing to put that truth, that inner voice of yours on the table. When people are out of stride, and for those of you who know our webinars and our processes, this model here, which we call the peak performance indicator, represents whether someone is in or out of stride. So when you are in stride, we've talked about people bringing their best performance, being fulfilled, you know, having great self-esteem and confidence, and their health and energy being really good. But the second thing that's really powerful about being in stride, and I don't think we've really vocalized this as much as we should, is that it brings forth a courage and a confidence and a desire, because there's a part of you that wants best. You know, when you're living your life in stride and feeling great, you don't want things sub-optimized. So there's a desire in you to confront things that you might have been putting off for a while. And that's you know, the second point that I was making on this slide here was that by you getting in stride and helping other people be more in stride, you don't have the same fear and anxiety and reluctance to share your truth. And this is why ID, in that as an inflection point for building, I'm not saying this to sell you, it's just what our clients have recognized as part of that process. But what I am acknowledging is it's not enough. As powerful as that is, there are some other ingredients. All right, so let's talk about what they are. I'm going to give you here a framework for having the real conversations. So let's start with what we just spoke about being in stride. And by the way, as I mentioned, I am sharing these slides. So if there's something on the slides, don't worry about taking notes on that. If you get something else, you might want to note that. But here's what's really important. The leader sets the temperature for the level of vulnerability that people are willing to go to. So if you have a leader that is insecure and not speaking from the heart and not speaking vulnerably, you're going to have a devil's own time, no matter how much ID knowledge is in the team. If the leader themselves isn't willing to be truly vulnerable and authentic, the rest of the team will follow suit. If a leader stands up and says their truth, but in a way that truly is a risk, you know, you can feel that they're laying it out on the table. That is the game changer for a team to sort of go, oh, is that where we're playing? Oh, okay. If it's safe to have that conversation like that, I can do that. And they will step up. Now, not everyone will be at the same level, but many will follow. And over the course of time, the rest of the team will follow. The second thing is help the team be in stride. There's a couple of things you need to do there. One is to use the ID so that people understand where are they similar, where are they different, and get that get you factor. You know, people get each other. But the second thing that's really important, and this was something that was missing in our team, was the sense of connection. People not only need to understand you when I say at a distance, through the lens of ID, they need to feel like there's more of a connection than that. So for example, when I said that we were struggling with this in our team, because of the trust that I felt was there, I had said to our team, guys, I'm not going to have one-on-ones with those of you that report to me, but my door is open. If you want to talk, come and talk. If there's anything on your mind, please know that that's a safe space to come and talk. And whilst that everyone that, you know, nods their heads and that's, you know, accepted and appreciated, people didn't come and talk. And so there ends up being a distance, not just between me and certain people, but there's a lack of contextual understanding. People see you do things or they hear about things, but if they don't take the time or have the mechanism to just have that one-on-one conversation to understand it, it means that there's a distancing in both connection and in context. And it's the lack of the context that stops people feeling safe and more willing to then have that conversation. So that is a really important piece. The third thing was you do need to have trust protocols. And I'll show you some of those on the next slide. So this means having things that you go around the team, like, you know, people say to us, if we're going to have a healthy team, we need to have rules of the game. What do we agree to do as members of this team? What meetings are we going to have? How do we make decisions? How do we agree to communicate with each other? Yes, and there needs to be similar agreements and protocols around trust and having these real conversations. I'll come back to them in a second. The fourth thing, and this came up for us last week, it was a really great insight. Sometimes, you know that sense of, hey, I can't control people's feelings. I can speak my truth, but I mean, if they're going to react the way they react, I mean, it is what it is, and they have to own their feelings. It was a really great insight, and it was very acknowledged within our team. And in fact, I think it even come up on the conference day, you've got to be aware of the impact that you're having on people, and you're going to make a lot more ground. Instead of criticizing someone's behavior, which causes them to resist and be defensive, talk more to the impact that has. You know, when you said that, this is what happened for me. When you did that, this is how that might land for other people. And people seem to have a much easier time reacting to the impact rather than the comment about them personally. And that's a really, you know, to me, like, it was a subtle difference, but it's such a crucial difference. And when we had that play out in our conversations, it was the game changer that really made the difference on being able to work through the real conversations really effectively. And lastly, you've got to have the regular one-to-ones, as I mentioned before. The one-to-ones I mentioned was not just about PPI check-ins, so checking, and I'll talk about them in a second, but also having the one-to-ones to stay connected around context. So let's talk about the team agreements, the ones around trust. The first thing is, I think, as a leader of a team, but you can do this even if you're not the leader, you can do this as a way of leading the team, is to say, are we going to be a team that demands real, authentic, and vulnerable conversations? Is that how we want to play? Now, every team, I'm sure, would say, yes, that's what we want to do. But in order to do that, there's things we need to establish. Like I said on that Y diagram before, You've got to do the work. But I think confronting that as a team agreement is, you can't just assume or deal with it implicitly. It needs to be very explicit, and the work to be done needs to be explicit, including the trust protocols. And I'm just going to give you two here, but these are the ones that our clients use to ensure that the trust is solid. The first is a protocol of assuming positive intent. And the second is a protocol around passive-aggressive behavior, zero tolerance. The litmus test, are we having the same conversations outside the room as we are inside the room? So if you hear yourself or notice yourself getting on a call after a meeting, checking in with someone saying, so what did you think of that meeting or that decision? That's contravening that protocol. And you need to check yourself on it. And as a member of the team, if you see someone else doing it, you need to call that out. Again, you can call it out by sharing the impact that that has on the team or maybe on you. So these protocols, assuming positive intent, it's not just about agreeing to it in the team. It's what does it mean? It means that when you hear people being critical, jumping to conclusions, making negative assumptions, not only will they strive to not do that, but as a member of the team, you will call them out on it. And there needs to be an agreement within the team that that's what we request each other to do for ourselves. That when you see that, and in our team, it's been a protocol we've had for years now, and I get called out on it. Someone will say to me, Paul, are you assuming positive intent? And the response always is, thank you. Thank you. You know, even if you were, the fact they called you out is really good behavior for the health of the team. And then the second one, zero tolerance for passive aggressive behavior. These not only take work and the conversation to install them, but you need to be vigilant around them. And I'd say get them printed up, put them up on walls so that they stay physically, apparent to people. And as a leader, make sure that you're calling these out on the team. And then finally, these one-to-ones. As a leader, if you're leading people and you want to be the person that stimulates and ensures you have this environment that allows for the real conversations, I'm just giving you a framework here for the one-to-one. So a PPI check-in is that peak performance check-in on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being that you're really in stride, and a 1 out of 10 is you're way out of stride. What's your number? And as this becomes a language in the team, it's a very quick exercise. So imagine I'm having a one-to-one with Ian. It's as simple as saying, so Ian, how are you? Like on a scale of 0 to 10, what's your number? And he just says, well, honestly, Paul, I'm probably a 6. Why is that? What's going on? And that leads to the second point. You don't need to do these mechanically. This can just be very informally in this conversation. And he might say, well, I'm working on this project right now, or I've had to deal with an issue and it really de-energized me. Well, what are the things that would energize you or that you are doing that energize you? And the more you can help someone play in that space of doing the things that energize them, the more in stride they'll be, and the more fulfilled and better their performance. And the more likely they are to have those conversations. And it's also the time to give whatever development feedback you might want to have. And that's a two-way street. That's not just a one-way street. But there's an important protocol around the one-to-ones, and that's what I just put down here contextually. The one-to-one is the opportunity for the private real conversation. And, it's up to both parties to make sure that there is that safety there, but that's the moment to have it out, to have that conversation respectfully. If people, as a way of preparing for it, they might want to go and brainstorm with someone else. But if they, after that one-to-one, they keep promulgating that sort of same noise, whatever was on their mind, elsewhere in an unhealthy way, that should be called out, and zero tolerance around that. I mean, if someone was to continue acting like that, they don't really want to belong to the team, and it wouldn't be healthy to keep them on the team for the sake of everybody else. So that's the framework for the real conversations. I might just stop there in case anyone has any questions. I know there's been a lot going on in the chat, which I haven't seen. So if anyone has anything separately, please feel free to call that out now before we move on.
Paul, I was just going to say that, and I made a comment in the chat, we did talk through that, you know, for various reasons, it can still be healthy and constructive to talk an issue through with someone else first.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of number one, to get a perspective, another perspective about whether it is an issue and whether you might be seeing something that other people aren't, or vice versa. You know, and also to work through constructively, you know, what's a good way to raise it, you know, with that person
100%.
that is going to sort of land and engage and hopefully get people to a better place. And that's something quite different than having lots of separate gossipy water cooler type conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling out, Krista. I did put that here in the contextual piece, but maybe I didn't mention or didn't sort of present that the right way, but that's exactly right. You want to, I think that's really healthy for someone to do that, you know, and sometimes it goes away when you brainstorm it with someone else, you know, they can help you understand it in a way where you go, oh, okay, it's no longer an issue, you know. You still might share it for the sake of just building connection with, you know, the other person. You still might share it and let them know where you've landed. But I think it's continuing that afterwards that's not so healthy.
So I want to add on to what Krista said, because I agree. Sometimes you just need somebody as a sounding board, like a coach or a mentorship. But it's important for whoever the person's having the conversation with to steer them back to taking it up with the person and not just let it. Maybe you might find, okay, I don't need to talk to the person, I've got it resolved. But if you don't, you need to go back to the person you don't have it resolved with.
Thank you, Pam. That's true. That's very good call out of closing that loop. Yeah.
Paul, I have a number of things to share about this. I have two people in my life right now who they're not part of my team, but they're part of my team because they're a friend and a family member. Neither one of them has had their ID, and I don't know if that's possible. However, I don't know if you have any thoughts about this, but I bring it up. I'm at the place now where I'm discontinuing those relationships because the two people in my vernacular as a coach, they are not coachable. I have talked to them and told them about asking questions and making assumptions and listening and all of that. And instead they go to the passive aggressive behavior. And with me, especially needing to be heard, it has had a tremendous effect on me, and wondered if you have any comments or anybody else about this situation.
Well, I can certainly understand the effect that's having on you with your ID, Judy, you know, as an avoid verify person, the empathy and then the disharmony of that obviously would dramatically affect you. It's maybe something might be easier to talk about offline so we can dig into it in more detail rather than involve everybody here.
Great.
If you'd like to do that, I'm happy to do that. Or if you'd feel more comfortable doing that with someone else on the call, please feel free to reach out.
Yep. Thank you. I will.
Okay. Thanks, Judy. Trace, I see you got your hand up. Aloha.
I do. Aloha, everyone. I don't know how to lower my hand, so here we go. It's funny, Judy. I know you'll take it offline, but there was something that you just said that I always think about with coaching, right? Is we can't coach people who don't want to be coached, right? So if they're uncoachable or if they don't want to be coached, it's very difficult to coach. And I remember Marshall Goldsmith, it always occurs to me, is there's no such thing as a good coach, there's only good clients. So it's like, goes back to that. It's really hard to coach someone who doesn't want to be coached. So I imagine that is very tough for you. So.
And I think about the book by Judith Glaser, Conversational Intelligence. And in that book, she mentions that some people are addicted to being right.
Yeah. Yeah. So back into psychological safety, there was two things that occurred to me. So as you went through the protocols, Paul, like the ones before and these ones, I heard a definition once about psychological safety, like what is psychological safety? And it was an environment of rewarded vulnerability. And so I like that definition, and I like that within all of these elements, we're honoring that, right? The leader to show up and be authentic and vulnerable and have that acknowledged by his team. The individuals to show up in conversation and be vulnerable and have that reward, quote, rewarded by the team. In one-to-one, somebody shows up and says, here's what's happening for me. And that behavior is rewarded, because that's right. It's building up and rewarding the behaviors that we want. And so I think there's an important step in this framework about how is vulnerability rewarded in teams? How is it acknowledged in teams? How is it recognized? How is it honored? Because I think that's what fosters that ongoing. So that was the first reaction I had, is I think each of these shares that, but I like that definition. The second one was when I did a class on psychological safety once, and one of the things I love that they talk about that I use a lot with teams is, you want to increase the intellectual friction that happens in a team while decreasing the social friction. And I think that's what we're talking about, is how do you increase like the real conversations, the dialogue, the pushing back, the feedback, the agreement, the team protocols, but we want to reduce the social friction. I just liked that. It helped me think about it when I talk to leaders about, we want to increase intellectual friction, but we want to reduce social friction. Like, what would do that?
That's I love that, Trace. That's a really great expression. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
I loved it too. It's not
that's
mine.
awesome.
I loved it too.
Yeah, that's great. Love it. Write that down. Thank you.
Greg, were you going to comment before? I saw you about to comment and then you went back on mute.
I was just going to ask Judy, but I typed it.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So Trace, your earlier point about how is it rewarded, rewarding an environment of rewarded vulnerability. One of the first things that occurs to me, and I don't know whether you have something on that you'd like to, well, I should ask you first. Is there something that you want to share on how it's done or what you've seen?
I think, so yes, I mean, there's so many things, because what happens, right, when we're hardwired is anytime we speak up and it's pushed down or defended or not acknowledged or whatever it is, you lose that, right? You start to lose your feeling of psychological safety. And anytime you speak up and it's acknowledged or recognized or appreciated, then you start to build it. I mean, Ilona gives a great example when she talks about, Ilona, you always say, your response, she coaches leaders, your response to feedback should only be one of two answers. Thank you so much, or tell me more, right? And I think that's a great example of, so I think it's just in micro things every day. I don't know if there's one big thing as much as it is in just honoring and recognizing and acknowledging. And yeah, that would be my thoughts, but I'm sure lots of people have lots of experience and thoughts.
Yeah, well, it's funny, I had the same thing in my mind. I was thinking it's gratitude. What fosters it is that sense of thank you. The tell me more, of course, makes sense. But I think it's one of those things, the person, when they feel that it's safe and it's consistently safe to then speak up, it builds a momentum that it's okay. I've had a saying for years, and those of you who have worked with me have heard me say this: vulnerability builds rapport. And so as you are vulnerable, it is just a law that your rapport with the team, for all that you felt it was a risk, it's actually the opposite that occurs. It actually strengthens the relationship and the connection you have with people. So it's an automatic thing that happens. If people can take a leap of faith to at least try it, they will never, it's like the law of every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It's a law. And there is a law around vulnerability. So if people can just, try it, they will quickly see that it works. And it doesn't mean that you'll get the reaction you wanted. Sometimes people are defensive, but it's their thing. that's their insecurity, it's their issue. And a month later, they come back to you and go, you know what, I've been thinking about that. And you're actually right. And they have more respect for you because you had the courage to raise it or not get flustered with them or whatever it might be. So trust that law. Vulnerability does build rapport. And I love those expressions that you give about the rewarded vulnerability and particularly the increased intellectual friction. I mean, all of us love, most people want to be in teams where it's really stimulating in terms of the growth we experience through the intellectual conversations, but not in a way where people feel confronted personally. All right, I want to move on to the ID piece. So the next thing we're going to talk about was how does our ID impact what we and others need to feel safe? So for all that we've just talked about, the model for real conversations, what about now where our ID either supports or gets in the way of that? And one of the things that I'd love to build with you, and I was actually going to put it in writing, but it didn't feel right to do this. But you know how we have the matrices that talk about, you know, what our strengths are, what our needs are, what our communication needs are. We can get quite specific around all of this. It'd be really cool to build a little model here that captures the key points about our drives. So for example, I'll just use mine as someone who's a verifier. I might say, well, when it comes to building psychological safety, the thing that I bring to the table is, you know, my questioning. You know, that's being able to be an active listener and delve, and that point Tracy said about tell me more, you know, digging in and getting to the depth. There's a natural, you know, curiosity that comes from the verified drive. The negative, what gets in the way, is a natural defensiveness. You know, you can very easily get defensive about someone who raises something. And that defensiveness doesn't have to be verbal. It can just be in your body language and, you know, the look that you give someone. So there's an example, right? And I would encourage you as we go through this for the remainder of our time today to just think about what is it about you. You might be able to see it relates to one drive. It might be your whole ID. You think about this is just me. But when, for the sake of sharing and expanding the knowledge of the group here, I'd love you to just think about your ID and maybe contribute. You can either do it verbally. Some might feel more comfortable doing it verbally. Some might feel better just put it in the chat. But we could very quickly build a little model here that would be of great value to all of you to understand where different drives both help and hinder the notion of real conversations. Who would like to kick something off? Where can you see with your ID? And you might be a verifier as well, but have something different to what I just shared as verifier. And by the way, I can easily think of other things as well, you know, that get in the way as a verifier, maybe other strengths as well, but it doesn't have to be just one or two things. There might be several. So who has something that they see in themselves that they feel either helps the real conversations or gets in the way and they've got to watch it?
Yeah, I'm thinking that with my, as I use Verify, I have to preface why I have to look things up. I had a boyfriend who used to say, like, you know, I just told you what it was. And I'm like, yeah, but I just need to look and make sure. Don't you trust me? Like, I just need to look and make sure. And then my assistant, the same thing. I have to preface things by saying, I completely trust your expertise, but I just have to ask you 7,400 questions right now so that I can get clear in my mind what needs to happen next. And then I don't break down the trust, right? Because otherwise I'm just thinking, like, I need to know 74 questions. Doesn't everybody need to know 74 questions? And she's not. She's a 2 in Verify. So she, you know, she's like, just tell me what you want. She's off and going. And I'm like, but wait. So I have to be careful about that because I don't attach any of my needing to know with the intimacy, but other people do.
That's really good. Thank you, Ellen. I'm making notes here as I'd be distracted if I was trying to type this, but I'll put that in later, but I'm just capturing what you say. And it's also the nuances we've got recorded here. You can hear this later too, guys. Thank you. Someone got something from a different direction or a different drive?
Yeah,
Well,
as,
Sorry, you go.
Go, Pam.
Okay, so the thing that jumps out for me is I think it's my use authenticate. So what I'm thinking about is that in terms of helping create a psychological safe environment, I think it's that desire to want to help. I think that may come across that I'm genuinely, well, two things. One, I'm going to be upfront and honest with you always. And secondly, if I can help, then I'm willing and able to help. So that possibly is something that will create the right environment. What might hinder it potentially is that need to take over when that's not what's required. So possibly that's something to think about.
The other one I would add is helping when they didn't actually want help. They were just like talking.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah. You want to help me? Don't help me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I could say the same thing about verifiers. You know, when someone's sharing something, you want to solve the problem for them. They didn't want it solved. They were just sharing. All right. Thanks, Natalie. Pam.
yeah, I was gonna say, for me, the avoid authenticate. And it's something I've had to obviously work on, but it's that getting the benefit of the doubt. Now, if I feel like the feedback isn't giving me the benefit of the doubt, that's been really hard in the past.
Yeah, that works both ways, doesn't it? Like you can, the strength you bring is you give people the benefit of the doubt and you don't sort of react. And then you can be too forgiving. And I always remember a particular leader that I used to love and admire, but a lot of people would say, yeah, he's the loveliest guy, but he can be too forgiving instead of calling things out and being more, explicit about it. Thank you.
Paul, this was something last week, I think I even voiced in our conference. And I think it's a composite actually of my 6-4-7-3. Every time you actually say the word trust, I find myself trying to examine what that looks like. So even during the conference, I was like, as I was gathering information and I was like, do I trust these people? Like with each experience, right? So that could be my verify or my complete, but I was literally tracking information and experiences unconsciously, not really consciously. Later, I would think, oh, I was really kind of tracking that so that I could decide whether that trust really existed, right? So that, whether it's good or bad, it's just kind of how I do it. But I think one of the drawbacks of that is, I might be slow to engage, like slow to be vulnerable, if you will, which is kind of ironic because I don't think I actually was slow to be vulnerable last week, just as a recent experience, but I just remember being very conscious of it.
Well, I think that's very true. I've had a lot of people say for people like your ID, the more familiar you get, there's the word they've used for me, familiar was the word, the more familiar you get over time, the more and the Karen that they met on day one will be a different Karen 6 months later. She's actually the same person, but because it's safer and you feel more aware and familiar, that you're now more willing to sort of lower the guard and let people in that increased sense of trust. So that would be true. There is a slower path to vulnerability with your ID than there is for others.
Paul, could I just check in that what we're doing here is looking at how I would create psychological safety for me to initiate a real conversation, and then what would have to happen for them to want to be in that? Is both sides of the give and receive here?
That's really good, Greg. That's so not that one. The one you just mentioned, that's another dimension we could add into this. We might do that when we get into the masterclass. Actually, that might be a really good addition to put. I was looking more at when you're in a team, given this was about creating it in teams, what is it about the way you show up, you know, that you need to be very conscious of, first, both that gets in the way of real conversations occurring and people having real conversations with you, and secondly, what might help foster the real conversation.
Yeah.
Basically.
What might enable it, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't find a need for psychological safety as a goal for me first. It's like, get the thing out there is the purpose here. The eight's going, but and that's my vulnerability in that they may not be interested or be ready for hear that. And that's why the more attention I have on them, the more likely I'll get it across, because I'll be letting them be my guideline as to what I say and how I say it. But for me, the need is a thing needs to be pointed out because it's going to damage the group. It takes precedence, and I have to make sure that doesn't override the fact that the people you're trying to tell it to, you might be scaring them so they won't hear it, you know.
100%. I was just checking as you spoke, there was someone who specifically asked to be on this call today, and I don't think they actually are, maybe they just wanted the recording. But I know that some of the feedback he's received as a strong authenticator is that he can be really destructive, and it just blew him away, because for someone wired to help, you know, if he puts the moose on the table, but in a way that's just black and white, he just calls it for what it is. He doesn't mean to offend anyone, but he'll call out the person and say it's about them. He's just being very direct, very explicit, very on point. But when he hasn't done the pre-work to sort of provide the context for it to land safely and comfortably, it was really destructive in the team, because they also didn't understand where this guy was coming from an ID point of view initially. But I think that's exactly the point you're making, that the intent is nothing but honorable. But if others aren't where you are, it can be actually a destructive outcome, which for the rest of the team. Well, I will say this, destructive temporarily. You know, sometimes the path to really getting, I know someone else that comes to mind that I would say he breaks a lot of glass, but although it's really uncomfortable, it's actually really cool, the impact that he makes, you know. But you can easily say, oh, well, it would have been good if you'd have done it like this and done a little bit more softly. If you'd have done all that, people probably wouldn't have got the message, you know. And there's something about the way an authenticator does it that even when it feels destructive, you still get that the intent was good. And I think, therefore, there's a cleaning up that can quickly get done. But I think some of the authenticators feel bad that it's like, oh, well, I certainly didn't mean to offend anyone or destroy anyone. And yeah. if I can get better at that, I'd like to learn that.
Well, one of the ways to get better is stay and take the heat of whatever we've just thrown in there. Like if we throw a grenade into the situation, we stay and take the heat of that, what it damage has done or how people are feeling, and don't just throw it and run, you know. And I have a suspicion that the thing that makes me feel the need for a real conversation has embedded in it the very vulnerability of me having that. And I wonder if that's true for other drives. That what a real conversation is defined by you, Paul, and what's defined by me may be totally different. And the conflict becomes, I'm trying to have this real conversation, you might be trying to have that. And could we get that clear first? Like, what's the real? And we might just be, we have to take turns, you know?
Well, I think that's right. You can have, you need to align on the real conversation. They're both real conversations, but it won't work if you're trying to solve for two different issues.
Yeah.
Cool.
Susie said something in the chat, and it was something that I was going to bring up as well. This is Patricia, about speaking her truth, and then it's taken or doubted or judged, and then it's difficult to feel safe. I feel that way. And also with my avoid verify, if it feels like it's going to be too hard, or I'm going to get asked too many questions or feel judged, I won't have the conversation. Or even more importantly, of course, now I get emotional. If I'm going to hurt their feelings, it's really hard for me to have those conversations.
Yes. And the challenge is, particularly for avoid verifiers and verifiers, that dynamic. Verifiers honestly don't realize that sometimes they come across as judging even though they're not judging. You know, like that's a different definition for that drive. Like judging to a verifier is a different thing to avoid verifiers feeling judged. So even a question, a verifier thinks they're asking a question to understand. They're not judging, they're just seeking to understand. It can feel like a judgment to the avoid verifier. I've even had avoid verifier say, even when you're complimenting me, the fact you're complimenting me and telling me something good is still a form of judgment, because you're ranking me or you're acknowledging. And it'd be interesting, Patricia, maybe can you expand on what you said, or can someone else, because I know this is an area of this difference between verifiers and avoid verifiers and the sense of judgment. Help us understand that a little bit more.
I'm thinking, so yeah, so questions aren't the issue for me as much as tone and body language that I see. Then I feel I'm being judged. And when I feel I'm being judged, I tend to shut down. Or I come out fighting. I have both. So I think I've heard the best for my avoid verify, the best defense is a good offense. And sometimes that definitely comes out. But if it's for me, it's tone or body language. The questions aren't the issue for me, but it's the tone that it's used in if it feels like it's judgment. So.
Has it also got anything to do with the quantity of questions? Because I just find, as most of you know, I have a child that's actually avoid verify, and sometimes it feels like a badger. And I'm just seeking to understand, as Paul said, like, because I'm not getting what I need. Yeah. But to her, it feels like I'm literally firing missiles.
Right.
So I don't even know, and maybe it has something to do, Patricia, with tone. Just like I can see how that would be. Maybe it is my tone. Maybe it is maybe I'm coming across in a way that I don't know, accusing.
Yeah, and it could be tone. And I was just thinking, is it too many questions? And I'm thinking, so in a work perspective, it's never too many questions. But I'm also thinking about my granddaughter who asked me 1,000 questions about the same thing over and over again. And then it's like, really? But if she puts context for me, because she's learned, then it diffuses everything. If I get a little bit of context of why she's asking the question, then I'm good, so I have a hard stop at 4. I have a call at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
But I don't want to stop this conversation because it's really good.
Well, we're going to dig into this more. We do the ID masterclass in 2 weeks' time. That's where we'll actually start. We can finish this. We haven't really talked as much about some of the avoid drives and the improvised drive. We haven't heard anything. So we will finish that off. But there'll be room then to get into some of the examples that I know will really bring this to life. And some of you might have, what I'd ask you to do is think about where have you got maybe some real conversations that have worked well, or maybe where you're struggling and you might want to talk about them with the team and get some input from the team, given the ID knowledge that's here, like a brains trust for you, to get some ideas on how you might be able to approach somebody to have that real conversation or to set up the safety. Guys, thank you for being here today. It's always fun to, we never know exactly what the learning is going to be, but there's always gold nuggets that come from this. Thank you for contributing and for just even being here to create the audience and the environment that allows us to continue learning like this. Have a great rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see most of you in a couple of weeks' time. Take care, everybody.